The Playboy Heir hires a housekeeper to clean his mansion, but what he discovers. The loud music finally died down at the Blackwood mansion as the last Ferrari sped away from the circular driveway, leaving beer bottles and champagne glasses scattered across the marble floors. Ethan Blackwood, 29, stood alone in his vast living room, loosening his designer tie while staring at his father's portrait above the fireplace. 6 months had passed since Richard Blackwood's death, but the painting still seemed to judge him with those stern eyes. "Another party, another waste of time," Ethan muttered, kicking aside an empty champagne bottle. The massive chandelier cast shadows across the room, making the $20 million mansion feel even emptier than usual. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through dozens of party photos. Everyone smiling, but no one really there for him. Just gold diggers and party crashers, attracted to his recently inherited fortune like moths to a flame. Across town in a small apartment on the east side of Lakewood Springs, Sarah Mitchell was already awake at 5 a.m. The 27-year-old moved quietly through her tiny kitchen, careful not to wake her sleeping sister. She counted out pills into a small plastic container, morning and evening doses for Emily's heart condition. The 16-year-old needed expensive medication to keep her failing heart working properly. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened yet another medical bill marked urgent. Working as a house cleaner wasn't exactly her dream job, but it paid better than retail, and she needed every dollar she could get. Since their parents' death 3 years ago in that awful car crash, she'd put her nursing school plans on hold. Emily needed her, and that was all that mattered. "Morning, sis," Emily's voice came from the doorway. She looked pale, dark circles under her eyes betraying another restless night. "Hey, sweetie, you should be sleeping." Sarah quickly tucked the bill into her pocket. "I can't sleep when my heart's playing drums." Emily tried to smile, but Sarah could see the pain in her eyes. "You shouldn't be working so hard. I feel terrible about—" "Don't." Sarah hugged her sister gently. "You're all I have left. We're in this together." The morning sun was barely peeking through the windows when Sarah's phone rang. Her heart stopped when she saw the hospital's number. "Ms. Mitchell." The voice was apologetic but firm. "I'm calling about Emily's insurance coverage. There's been a change in policy. Your current plan will be terminated in 30 days unless—" Sarah's knees went weak. She gripped the kitchen counter, trying to keep her voice steady. But Emily's condition. She needs her medication, her treatments." "I understand, but without proper coverage or payment arrangements." Sarah hung up, her mind racing. Emily's medication alone cost thousands each month. Without insurance, they'd be completely lost. She looked at her cleaning schedule for the day. 3 regular houses, but 1 new client. Some rich guy in Lakewood Springs who needed post-party cleanup. "Everything okay?" Emily asked, noticing her sister's pale face. Sarah forced a smile. "Just a reminder about work. New client today, paying double for emergency cleanup." She grabbed her cleaning supplies, trying to hide her shaking hands. "Take your morning pills, okay? I'll be back before your afternoon dose." As she drove her old Honda toward the wealthy side of town, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the insurance. 30 days. She had 30 days to figure out how to keep her sister alive. The morning traffic blurred through her tears, but she wiped them away quickly. She couldn't afford to break down. Not now. Not when Emily needed her to be strong. Have you ever faced a moment when you had to be strong for someone you love? Share your city in the comments and tell me your story of overcoming challenges. Let's get emotional together. Little did Sarah know that her next cleaning job would change her life forever. As she pulled up to the enormous gates of the Blackwood mansion, she had no idea she was about to meet someone who would turn her world upside down, for better or worse. Sarah stared at the mess inside the Blackwood mansion, her heart sinking. Empty bottles covered every surface, and the marble floors were sticky with spilled drinks. The cleaning service hadn't warned her about the scale of the disaster. This would take hours longer than planned. Hours she couldn't spare with Emily waiting for her afternoon medication. Great, another cleaner who's just going to stand there gawking. A cold voice made her jump. Ethan Blackwood stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at her with bloodshot eyes and yesterday's rumpled designer suit. "The agency said you'd be here an hour ago?" "I'm sorry, sir. The traffic—" Sarah swallowed her pride, remembering Emily's medical bills. "I'll work quickly. Whatever." Ethan waved dismissively. "Just keep the noise down. I have a headache." He disappeared into one of the many upstairs rooms, slamming the door. Sarah took a deep breath and got to work. The main hall alone took 2 hours, but she couldn't help noticing details as she cleaned. Family photos where young Ethan smiled genuinely, recent ones where his eyes looked empty, a father's stern face watching from ornate frames, expensive furniture that hadn't been dusted in months. In the study, while cleaning around a massive mahogany desk, Sarah noticed something odd. Behind a fallen books was a sealed envelope, addressed to Ethan in elegant handwriting. The date stamp showed it had arrived shortly after Richard Blackwood's death, but the envelope was unopened. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The return address simply read, Dad. This was probably important. She should give it to Ethan right away. But something made her hesitate. The way he'd looked at her earlier like she was nothing. Find something interesting? Ethan's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Sarah's heart raced. I found this letter. It's from your father. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Pain? Fear? But his voice remained cold. Just throw it away with the rest of the trash. But sir, it's from your father. I said throw it away. Ethan snapped, then winced at his own volume. Look, what I do with my mail is none of your business. Just finish cleaning and go. He stormed out, leaving Sarah holding the letter. She should throw it away. It was his choice, after all. But she remembered the medical bills in her pocket, Emily's pale face this morning, and something else. The sadness she'd glimpsed beneath Ethan's anger. Before she could change her mind, Sarah slipped the letter into her pocket. She'd read it herself. Maybe there was something in it that could help both of them. It was probably wrong, definitely illegal. But she was running out of options. The rest of the house took hours to clean. By the time Sarah finished, Ethan hadn't emerged from his room again. She left her invoice with the housekeeper, Martha, a kind-faced older woman who looked at her with sympathy. Don't take his attitude personally, dear, Martha said softly. He's been lost since his father died. Not that he wasn't lost before, mind you, she sighed. Will you be coming back tomorrow? The agency said we needed someone regular. Sarah thought about the letter in her pocket, about Emily, about the broken young man upstairs. Yes, she heard herself say. I'll be back tomorrow. Driving home, the letter seemed to burn in her pocket. What secrets did it hold? Could it somehow be the key to helping her sister? Or was she about to make the biggest mistake of her life? The sun was setting over Lakewood Springs as Sarah parked outside her apartment building. She checked her phone. 3 missed calls from the hospital's billing department. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would read the letter. Tonight she needed to focus on Emily. But fate had other plans, and the words in that sealed envelope were about to change everything. For both Sarah and the broken heir, who thought he had everything but really had nothing at all. Later that night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table, staring at the unopened letter. The envelope felt heavy in her hands, weighted down by guilt and desperation. She'd never stolen anything in her life. Her parents had raised her better than that. But they'd also taught her to do whatever it took to protect family. What would you do, Mom? She whispered to the empty kitchen, glancing at the family photo on the fridge. The last picture they'd taken together, just days before the accident. Her mom's smile seemed to hold no answers tonight. Sarah's phone buzzed with another text from the hospital's billing department. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope, careful not to tear it. As she unfolded the letter, a small key fell onto the table. Dear Ethan, she read silently, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I know we haven't spoken since our last fight, but there are things you need to know. Sarah's eyes widened as she continued reading. Richard Blackwood's last words to his son weren't what she'd expected at all. Across town, Ethan lay awake in his king-size bed, staring at the ceiling. The mansion creaked around him, too big, too empty. He picked up his phone, scrolling through old text messages from his father. Their last conversation had been an argument about responsibility, about growing up, about being worthy of the Blackwood name. You were right, Dad, he muttered. I'm exactly the disappointment you always said I was. He thought about the cleaner, Sarah, finding that letter. The look in her eyes hadn't been judgmental like everyone else's. It had been concerned? No, she was just another person trying to get something from him. They all were. His phone lit up with messages from last night's party guests, invitations to more meaningless celebrations. Ethan threw the phone across the room. What was he doing with his life? The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the mansion, the letter burning a hole in her bag. She'd barely slept, torn between returning it unread and using what she'd learned. The choice was taken from her when she walked into the kitchen and found Ethan already there, nursing a coffee. You're early, he said, not looking up. Mr. Blackwood, I need to tell you something. Sarah's voice shook. Yesterday, when I found that letter, I told you to throw it away. His voice was sharp. I read it. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I know about the condition in your father's will, about the 3 months you have left to prove yourself, about losing everything if you don't change. Ethan's coffee cup crashed to the floor. You what? His face went from shock to furious. How dare you? You're fired. Get out before I call the police. Your father believed in you, Sarah shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. He knew you could be more than this. That's why he did it, to give you a chance to prove everyone wrong. You don't know anything about my father, about me. I know what it's like to lose parents, Sarah said quietly. To feel lost, to need a second chance. Something in her voice made Ethan pause. Why did you read it? The truth. Sarah took a deep breath. Because I need help, and I think maybe you do too. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Outside, sprinklers came on, making patterns on the window. 2 broken people stood in that pristine kitchen, both afraid, both desperate, both standing on the edge of a decision that would change everything. My sister's dying, Sarah finally said. And I need money for her treatment. You need to prove you can be responsible and compassionate. Maybe we can help each other. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. The anger in his eyes slowly mixed with something else. Fear, hope. You're crazy, he said finally. This is crazy. Crazier than throwing your life away to spite your father's memory? The words hit home. Ethan flinched as if she'd slapped him. For the first time, Sarah saw past his arrogant facade to the lost boy underneath. He opened his mouth to respond, but the moment was interrupted by the arrival of Martha, the housekeeper, carrying fresh towels. The choice hung in the air between them. Sometimes the craziest decisions turned out to be the most important ones, and sometimes rock bottom was exactly where you needed to be to start climbing back up. Martha's arrival broke the tension in the kitchen, but her experienced eyes didn't miss the electricity in the air between Sarah and Ethan. She'd worked for the Blackwoods for 30 years, long enough to know when something important was happening. I'll come back later, she said, turning to leave. No, stay, Ethan said suddenly. You knew my father better than anyone. He looked at Sarah, then back to Martha. What was he really like? Not as my father or a businessman, but as a person? Martha set down her towels and pulled out a kitchen chair. Oh, your father. He wasn't always the stern man you knew. She smiled softly. Did you know he used to volunteer at the Children's Hospital? Every Christmas dressed as Santa. He never told anyone. Didn't want it in the papers. Said real kindness doesn't need an audience. Ethan sank into a chair, looking stunned. I never knew that. There's a lot you didn't know about Richard, Martha continued. Like how he started out poor, working 2 jobs to put himself through college. How he lived on ramen noodles and donated plasma for extra cash. She looked meaningfully at Sarah. He never forgot what it was like to struggle. Sarah listened, intently seeing Ethan's face change as Martha spoke. The housekeeper's words were painting a picture of a very different man than the cold, demanding father Ethan had described. That the night before he died, Martha said quietly, he sat in this kitchen drinking tea. He told me his biggest regret was not showing you the real him, not teaching you that true wealth isn't in your bank account. It's in what you do for others. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his new coffee cup. Why are you telling me this now? Because. Martha looked between him and Sarah. I think your father sent you exactly what you need. Both of you. What do you mean? Sarah asked. Martha stood up, smoothing her apron. Richard always said life sends us the teachers we need, even if they come in unexpected packages. She picked up her towels. Sometimes the best way to help yourself is to help someone else. After Martha left, silence filled the kitchen again. But it was different now, thoughtful rather than tense. My sister, Sarah finally said, she's at Hartford Memorial, same hospital where your father used to volunteer. She pulled out her phone, showing Ethan a picture of Emily. She has a rare heart condition. The insurance company is dropping us in 30 days. Ethan stared at the photo of the smiling teenager. What's her name? Emily. She's 16, wants to be an artist. Sarah's voice softened. Even with everything she's going through, she still finds reasons to smile. Reminds me of what Martha said about your father, how real kindness doesn't need an audience. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured gardens. 3 months, he said finally. That's what the letter said. I have 3 months to prove I can be responsible and compassionate, or I lose everything. And I have 30 days to figure out how to keep my sister alive. Sarah stood too. I'm not asking for charity. Mr. Blackwood, I'm offering a deal. I'll help you become the man your father knew you could be, and in return, I help save your sister. Ethan turned to face her. You really think you can change me in 3 months? I think you can change yourself. You just need a reason. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Your father believed in second chances. Maybe it's time you did too. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Two people from different worlds stood in that light, both at crossroads, both needing something only the other could provide. "Okay," Ethan said finally, "but we do this my way." Sarah shook her head. "No, Mr. Blackwood. We do this the right way. Your father's way." For the first time since she'd met him, Ethan smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "First rule, if we're going to do this, you need to stop calling me Mr. Blackwood. It's Ethan." Neither of them knew it then, but that moment in the sunlit kitchen was the beginning of a journey that would change not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Sometimes the best teachers come in unexpected packages, and sometimes the hardest lessons turn out to be the most valuable ones of all. The next day, Sarah waited nervously in the hospital parking lot. She'd convinced Ethan to visit Emily as his first step toward change, but now she worried it might be too much too soon. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "Here, where are you?" She spotted him immediately, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit. "You didn't have to dress up," she said, approaching him. "This isn't a business meeting." "I always dress like this," Ethan replied stiffly, but she could see his hands fidgeting with his tie. "I've never actually been in this part of the hospital before." "Just be yourself," Sarah said, then caught herself. "I mean, your real self, not the party boy persona." Inside, the pediatric ward was alive with activity. Children in wheelchairs, nurses rushing about, parents with worried faces, a world Ethan had never experienced. He followed Sarah, trying not to look as uncomfortable as he felt. Emily was sitting up in bed, sketching in her notebook. Her face lit up when she saw Sarah, then turned curious at the sight of Ethan. "Who's your friend, sis?" "This is Ethan, he's..." Sarah hesitated. "I'm someone who needs to learn a few things," Ethan said, surprising both sisters with his honesty. "Your sister's helping me with that." Emily studied him with wisdom beyond her years. "Are you the rich guy whose house she cleans?" "Emily!" Sarah scolded, but Ethan actually laughed. "Yes, I am, and I'm probably the messiest rich guy in Lakewood Springs." He noticed Emily's sketches. "You're an artist?" For the next hour, Emily showed Ethan her drawings, telling him about her dreams of going to art school. Sarah watched in amazement as the arrogant playboy she knew slowly disappeared, replaced by someone who listened intently and asked genuine questions. The moment was shattered by a commotion in the hallway. "Where is he?" a sharp voice demanded. "I know he's here." Ethan's face went pale. "Grandmother," he whispered. Victoria Blackwood swept into the room like a storm cloud in designer clothes. Her elegant features twisted with disgust as she surveyed the scene. "So it's true. My grandson, consorting with the help in some public hospital." "Grandmother, this isn't..." "Silence!" Victoria's voice could have frozen fire. "I leave for 2 weeks, and you're already disappointing your father's memory. Again." Sarah stood protectively near Emily's bed. "Mrs. Blackwood, this is a hospital. There are sick children. And who exactly are you?" Victoria's eyes cut through Sarah like ice. "The little cleaning girl who thinks she can social climb her way into my family? I know your type." "Don't talk to her like that." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. Everyone in the room turned to look at him in surprise. "Sarah and Emily are my friends," Victoria laughed coldly. "Friends? Oh, darling. People like us don't have friends. We have employees and opportunists." She grabbed Ethan's arm. "Come, the car's waiting." But Ethan didn't move. For the first time in his life, he stood his ground against his grandmother. "No, I'm not finished here." "Excuse me?" "I said no." His voice grew stronger. "Dad used to volunteer here. Did you know that?" "Of course not." "Because he knew you'd react exactly like this." Victoria's face turned dangerous. "Your father was weak. His bleeding heart nearly ruined this family. I won't let you make the same mistakes." Maybe his mistakes were worth making. Ethan gently pulled his arm free. "I'm staying." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "We'll discuss this later, at length." She turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving the room in stunned silence. Emily broke the tension. "Well, she seems nice." The unexpected comment made everyone laugh, releasing the stress in the room. But Sarah could see the worry in Ethan's eyes. He'd just made a powerful enemy, and this was only the beginning. "You didn't have to do that," Sarah said softly. "Yes, I did." Ethan looked at Emily's drawings again. "Now, for the first time in my life, I'm doing something that matters." He smiled at the young artist. "Keep drawing, Emily. The world needs more beauty in it." As they left the hospital later, Sarah realized something had fundamentally changed. Ethan walked differently, held himself differently. One small act of defiance against his grandmother had awakened something in him, something that had been sleeping for far too long. But Victoria Blackwood wasn't a woman who accepted defiance, and her vengeful shadow would soon test them all in ways they never expected. Victoria Blackwood didn't waste any time. Within days, Sarah started losing her regular cleaning clients. One by one, they called to cancel, all with different excuses that somehow felt the same. By the end of the week, the Blackwood Mansion was her only remaining job. "It's her, isn't it?" Sarah asked Martha one morning while cleaning the library. "Mrs. Blackwood is calling them," Martha nodded grimly. "Victoria has influence with every wealthy family in Lakewood Springs. One word from her." She didn't need to finish the sentence, but losing clients was just the beginning. When Sarah went grocery shopping, she noticed whispers following her through the store. At Emily's hospital, some of the nurses who used to chat with her now looked away uncomfortably. "Did you hear?" she overheard one nurse saying. "She's trying to seduce the Blackwood heir, using her sick sister to play on his sympathy." The rumors spread like poison through the small town. Sarah was a gold digger, a manipulator, a charity case trying to climb the social ladder. Each new story hurt worse than the last, but she kept her head high. Emily needed her to be strong. Ethan noticed the changes too. The way people whispered when Sarah walked with him through the hospital. The cruel comments on social media about the cleaning girl, seen with him at local restaurants. But instead of pulling away as Victoria expected, it made him more determined. "We're having dinner at Giuseppe's tonight," he announced one afternoon, walking into the kitchen where Sarah was working. "I can't," she replied quickly. "People will talk, and let them." His voice was firm. "I'm done hiding, done being what other people want me to be." That evening at Lakewood Springs' most exclusive restaurant, heads turned as Ethan and Sarah walked to their table. Victoria's friends whispered behind elegant menus. Phones appeared to snap discreet photos. "Everyone's staring," Sarah whispered, wishing she'd worn something nicer than her simple blue dress. "Then let's give them something worth staring at." Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The restaurant fell, silent as he clinked his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried clearly through the quiet room, "I see you're all very interested in my dinner companion. So let me introduce you properly to Sarah Mitchell. She's the woman who's teaching me how to be a better person, something many of you could learn from. She works harder than anyone in this room, taking care of her sick sister while dealing with the cruel gossip spread by people who don't know the first thing about character or dignity." Gasps and murmurs filled the restaurant. Sarah's face burned, but Ethan wasn't finished. "So yes, take your pictures, spread your rumors, but know this, I'm proud to be seen with Sarah Mitchell. And if that costs me my place in your elite social circles..." He smiled coldly. "Well, I'm starting to think that's not much of a loss at all. Has someone ever stood up for you when it mattered most? Share your story in the comments and subscribe to hear what happens next in this emotional journey. Were you touched by Ethan's transformation? Let us know. Back at the mansion that night, Martha was waiting with news. "Victoria's on the warpath," she warned. "She's called an emergency meeting of the Blackwood Holdings Board. She's trying to freeze Ethan out of the company completely." Sarah's heart sank. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't..." "Don't," Ethan cut her off. "For the first time in my life, I'm fighting for something real, something that matters." He looked at Sarah with determination. "My grandmother wants a war? Fine. But she's about to learn I'm not the same weak grandson she can push around anymore." But Victoria was just getting started, and her next move would test them all in ways they never imagined, because Victoria Blackwood hadn't maintained her power over the family for decades by playing nice, and she had no intention of letting a cleaning girl ruin everything she'd built. Martha found Sarah early one morning, clutching an old photograph in the mansion's kitchen. She recognized Sarah's mother immediately. Janet Mitchell had been hard to forget, even after all these years. "I miss her so much," Sarah whispered, tracing her mother's smile in the photo. "Especially now with everything happening with Emily." Martha's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. "Sarah, there's something you need to know." She pulled out a chair. "About your mother, about the accident?" Sarah's heart stopped. "What about it?" "Last week I was cleaning Victoria's office, something I rarely do. I found some papers." Martha's voice shook. "Your mother, she didn't die in that crash, Sarah. She's alive, in a coma, at Pine Grove Care Center in Montana." The photo slipped from Sarah's fingers, crashing to the floor. The glass cracked. "No, that's impossible. They told us..." The police said, "Victoria found out months ago. She's been keeping track of your mother's condition." Martha pulled out a folded document. She's been using this information, waiting for the right moment to... Before she could finish, Sarah's phone rang. The hospital's number flashed on the screen. Her hands shook so badly she could hardly answer. "Ms. Mitchell, it's Emily. You need to come right away." The next 20 minutes were a blur. Ethan found her trying to start her car with trembling hands. Without a word, he took her keys and drove her to the hospital himself. Emily was pale, hooked up to more machines than usual. The doctor's words came in fragments. Heart rhythm. Deteriorating. Need immediate intervention. But the insurance, Sarah stammered. It's not, I'll handle it, Ethan said firmly. But even his credit cards and family name couldn't change hospital policy. They needed pre-approval for the procedure. Sarah stood by Emily's bed, holding her sister's hand, torn between two impossible truths. Her mother was alive, had been alive all this time. And now Emily, she couldn't lose them both. Not like this. Tell me about Montana, Emily said weakly, trying to distract herself from the pain. Is that where Mom is? Sarah's head snapped up. I heard you and Ethan in the hallway. Emily managed a small smile. You were kind of loud. I don't even know if it's true, Sarah whispered. Now, how could they keep this from us for 3 years? Because people like Victoria Blackwood think they can play God with other people's lives, Ethan's voice came from the doorway. His face was hard with anger. But that ends today. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number. Mr. Harrison, this is Ethan Blackwood. I need the corporate jet ready in an hour. He looked at Sarah. We're going to Montana. I can't leave Emily, Sarah protested. You're not. Ethan's voice softened. I've called in every favor I have. The best cardiac specialist in the country is flying in from Mayo Clinic. Emily will have the care she needs. He took Sarah's hand. But your mother needs you too. And I think maybe this is why everything happened. Why we found each other. Emily squeezed her sister's hand. Go, Sarah. Find Mom. I'll be okay. But before any decisions could be made, Emily's monitors started beeping frantically. Her hand went limp in Sarah's grasp. Doctors and nurses rushed in, pushing them aside. Heart rate dropping. Blood pressure critical. We need to move her to ICU now. Sarah felt her world spinning. Too much. It was all too much. Her mother alive but unreachable. Emily slipping away. And through it all, Ethan's hand steady on her shoulder, anchoring her in the storm. Whatever happens, he whispered, you're not alone anymore. We'll face it together. As they watched Emily being rushed away, Sarah realized how much had changed. The spoiled Playboy who'd sneered at her weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood what really mattered in life. But Victoria's shadow still loomed over them all. And as they would soon discover, the truth about Janet Mitchell was even more complicated and dangerous than they could have imagined. Victoria Blackwood's heels clicked ominously through the hospital corridor. It was nearly midnight, but she'd timed her visit perfectly. Sarah sat alone in the ICU waiting room, while Ethan had gone to get coffee. Miss Mitchell, Victoria's voice cut through the quiet. We need to talk. Sarah straightened in her uncomfortable plastic chair. Mrs. Blackwood, this isn't the time. On the contrary. Victoria sat down, smoothing her expensive skirt. This is exactly the time. When you're at your weakest, worried about your sister. She smiled coldly. And your mother. Sarah's breath caught. So it's true. You've known about my mother all this time. Of course I have. Information is power, dear. And I've been waiting for the right moment to use it. Victoria opened her designer purse, removing a thick envelope. Inside is a cashier's check for $500,000. Enough for Emily's surgery and your mother's continued care in Montana. All you have to do is disappear from my grandson's life. The envelope sat between them like a loaded gun. Sarah's hands trembled. But why are you doing this? Because the Blackwood name means something. Our legacy, our reputation. It's worth more than some little romance between a confused heir and his cleaning girl. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You have until morning to decide. Take the money and leave Lakewood Springs forever, or watch both your sister and mother suffer the consequences. Before Sarah could respond, footsteps approached. Victoria stood smoothly. Remember, until morning. She disappeared down the hallway, just as Ethan returned with coffee. Was that my grandmother? He asked, frowning. Sarah clutched the envelope, her mind racing. Just checking on Emily. But Ethan knew better. He'd seen that look on too many people's faces after dealing with Victoria. What did she do? Before Sarah could answer, Martha burst into the waiting room, out of breath. Thank God you're both here. You need to see this. She pulled a worn envelope from her pocket. I found it while cleaning Richard's old study, hidden in a false bottom drawer. Ethan took the envelope. His hands shook as he recognized his father's handwriting. Another letter? Read it, Martha urged. Now. As Ethan read, his face went through a range of emotions. Shock, anger, understanding. Dad knew, he whispered. He knew what grandmother was doing. The manipulation, the control. That's why he put that condition in his will. He was trying to save me from her. There's more, Martha said softly. Read the last page. Ethan's eyes widened. A separate account. One grandmother doesn't know about? With enough money to... He looked at Sarah, then at Victoria's envelope still clutched in her hands. What did she offer you? Sarah's voice broke as she confessed everything. The ultimatum, the money, the threats. To her surprise, Ethan smiled. Dad knew this would happen. Look. He showed her the letter's final paragraph. He set aside this money specifically for someone who would help Ethan find his way back to himself. He knew I'd need help breaking free from her control. But Emily needs the surgery now, Sarah whispered. And my mom. Your mom won't get better care from Victoria's blood money than she will from what my father left for exactly this purpose. Ethan took her hand. He wanted to make things right. Not just for me, but for anyone who got caught in Victoria's web. Martha watched them with tears in her eyes. Richard would be so proud of you both. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Emily's nurse. Her condition had stabilized. They could see her soon. Take the envelope back to Victoria, Ethan said firmly. Tell her thanks, but no thanks. We're doing this our way now. But as they would soon learn, Victoria Blackwood didn't take rejection well, and her next move would push them all to their breaking points. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are those who think they're protecting the ones they love, no matter who they have to destroy in the process. The next morning, Sarah stared at Victoria's envelope on her kitchen table. She'd been up all night, torn between pride and desperation. Emily's latest test results lay next to the envelope. Her heart was getting weaker. The doctors had given them a week at most to decide about the surgery. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Meeting with the bank about Dad's account. Then we can make plans for Montana. Everything's going to be okay. Sarah's thumb hovered over the reply button, but she couldn't type the words. Instead, she picked up her phone and dialed another number. Mrs. Blackwood, I need to see you. An hour later, Sarah sat in Victoria's elegant home office. Everything about the room screamed power and control. From the antique desk to the wall of family photos, where Ethan's smile grew faker with each passing year. So, Victoria said, you've made your decision? Yes. Sarah's voice was steady despite her breaking heart. I'll take your deal with 2 conditions. First, I want proof that my mother will receive the best possible care. Victoria slid a folder across the desk. Already arranged. Pine Grove's finest suite. Private nurses, the best doctors. Second, Sarah continued, I want to say goodbye to Ethan myself, my way. Absolutely not. Then no deal. Sarah stood up. I'll tell him everything right now, about the blackmail, about my mother. Sit down, Victoria snapped. Then, composing herself, 1 hour, that's all you get. And if you breathe a word of our arrangement, I won't. Sarah's shoulders slumped. Just make sure Emily gets her surgery, please. Back at the mansion, Sarah found Ethan practically bouncing with excitement. The account's real, he exclaimed. Dad left nearly $10 million. We can help Emily, your mother, everyone. Sarah's heart shattered, but she forced herself to stay strong. Ethan, I need to tell you something. Wait, there's more. He grabbed her hands. I've been thinking. After we get your mom and Emily taken care of, maybe we could turn part of the mansion into a recovery center for families dealing with long-term illness. Dad would have loved that. Ethan, please. And I've already called the hospital in Montana. They're expecting us tomorrow. Can you believe it? After all this time, you'll finally... I can't see you anymore. The words burst out like bullets. Ethan froze. What? This, whatever this is between us. It has to stop. Each word felt like swallowing glass. You're a Blackwood. I'm nobody. This was never going to work. Sarah, what are you talking about? After everything we've been through. It was a mistake. She pulled her hands away. I was desperate about Emily, about my mom. I used you, just like your grandmother said. The hurt in his eyes was unbearable. You don't mean that? I'm leaving Lakewood Springs. Tonight. Don't try to find me. She turned away before he could see her tears. Goodbye, Ethan. She was halfway to her car when she heard the mansion's front door slam. The roar of Ethan's sports car engine. He was going too fast, taking the curved driveway at dangerous speed. Ethan, stop! She screamed, but it was too late. The screech of tires. The horrible sound of metal crushing against the stone gates. Then, silence. Martha came running out. Call 911! Sarah reached the wreck first. Ethan was unconscious, blood trickling from his forehead. His phone had fallen onto the passenger seat, open to a text from his bank. Suspicious activity on account. All transfers frozen pending investigation. Victoria. She must have frozen the account somehow. That's why Ethan had been driving so recklessly, rushing to the bank in desperation as sirens wailed in the distance. Sarah held Ethan's limp hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry," but Ethan couldn't hear her. And somewhere in the mansion, Victoria Blackwood watched through a window. Her face, an unreadable mask. The piece had moved exactly as she'd planned, but the game was far from over. The hospital waiting room felt different when you were the one waiting for news. Sarah sat with her head in her hands, Emily's worried voice still echoing in her mind from their phone call. "Don't leave him, sis. Not like this." Martha paced nearby, alternating between prayers and quiet sobs. Doctors rushed in and out, their faces giving nothing away. Multiple injuries, internal bleeding, critical condition. Victoria swept in like a storm cloud, her usual composure cracking slightly when she saw the blood on Sarah's clothes. "What are you still doing here? Haven't you done enough damage?" "Mrs. Blackwood," Martha stepped forward, "now isn't the time. It's exactly the time." Victoria's voice shook. "My grandson is fighting for his life because of this gold digger." "He's fighting for his life because you froze his account," Sarah shot back, standing up. "Because you couldn't stand losing control. Because you'd rather destroy him than let him be happy. How dare you? I took your deal." Sarah's voice broke. "I did what you wanted. I broke his heart to save my sister, but it wasn't enough, was it? You had to make sure he had nothing. No way to help anyone." Victoria went pale. I never meant for him to..." "Ladies," a tired voice interrupted. The doctor looked between them. "Mr. Blackwood is stabilized, but he's in a coma. The next 24 hours are critical. He needs calm, positive energy around him. Not..." He gestured at their confrontation. "This." In Ethan's ICU room, machines beeped steadily. His face was bruised, tubes helping him breathe. Sarah's heart clenched. He looked so much like Emily had during her worst days. "Talk to him," the nurse encouraged. Coma patients can often hear..." But what could she say? That she was sorry? That every cruel word had been a lie? A sudden commotion interrupted her thoughts. Emily was being wheeled into the room in her own hospital bed, still attached to her monitors. "What's happening?" Sarah rushed to her sister. "Her idea," the nurse explained. "She insisted on being moved in here. Said something about two hearts being stronger than one." Emily reached out, taking one of Ethan's limp hands in hers. "Hey, rich guy," she said softly. "You can't check out now. We've got plans, remember? That art therapy program you promised to help me start?" Sarah watched in amazement as her sister talked to Ethan about everything and nothing. Her latest sketches, her dreams, the future she could see so clearly. Emily's heart monitor beeped in steady rhythm with Ethan's, like they were having their own conversation. Somewhere in the darkness of his coma, Ethan floated. He could hear voices, feel touches, but everything was distant, underwater. Then suddenly a bright light. "Son." His father stood before him. Not the stern businessman from the portraits, but the way Ethan barely remembered him. Younger, smiling, kind. "Dad, am I..." "No, not yet." Richard Blackwood's eyes twinkled. "You've got too much left to do." "I failed you," Ethan whispered. "Now the will, the conditions..." "You didn't fail me. You found exactly what I hoped you would. Someone who could show you the real meaning of wealth." "Sarah." The name hurt even here in this strange between place. "She loves you, son. Enough to break her own heart to protect her family. Remind you of anyone?" Images flashed through Ethan's mind. His father working late, missing parties, enduring Victoria's criticism, all to build something that would last. "Your grandmother," Richard sighed. "She thinks love is control, but real love? Real love sets people free. I don't know how to fix this." "Yes, you do." His father's form began to fade. "You've always known. You just needed to find something worth fighting for." "Dad, wait!" "Wake up, son. They're waiting for you. All of them." The light faded. The beeping returned. And somewhere in the darkness, Ethan began to fight his way back. At his bedside, Emily suddenly squeezed his hand tighter. "Sarah!" His fingers moved. The monitors changed rhythm. Doctors rushed in. And in that moment, watching her sister holding the hand of the man she loved, Sarah made a decision. No more deals, no more secrets. Whatever Victoria did next, they would face it together. Because sometimes, between life and death, we finally see what matters most. Ethan opened his eyes to find Emily sketching in a chair beside his hospital bed. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on her art pad. "You're pretty good," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. Emily's pencil clattered to the floor. "You're awake. Sarah! Martha! He's awake! The room quickly filled with doctors, nurses, and tearful faces. But Ethan's eyes searched for only one person. Sarah stood in the doorway, hesitating, until Emily grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. "How long?" Ethan asked, trying to sit up. 3 days, Martha said, adjusting his pillows. "You gave us quite a scare, young man." The doctor checked his vitals, nodding with satisfaction. "The worst is over. But you'll need time to recover fully." As the medical staff filed out, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Sarah couldn't meet Ethan's eyes, but before anyone could speak, Martha cleared her throat. "There's something you both need to see." She pulled out her phone. "I've been doing some digging in Victoria's files. What I found..." She played a video, security footage from Victoria's office dated 3 years ago. On the screen, Janet Mitchell, Sarah's mother, stood arguing with Victoria. "You can't keep manipulating him. Like this," Janet was saying. "Richard knows what you're doing. The emotional abuse, the control..." "Richard is weak," Victoria snapped. "Just like his son. They need a firm hand. I'm going to tell them everything. All the documents I've found, the secret accounts, how you've been..." The video cut off abruptly. "That was the day of the accident," Sarah whispered. "Mom was coming to meet me for lunch, but she never made it," Martha finished, "because someone tampered with her brakes." The room went deadly quiet. Ethan's heart monitor beeped faster. "There's more," Martha continued. "I found records of payments. Hospital bills in Montana. Your mother didn't die in that crash, Sarah. Victoria's been keeping her hidden, using her as insurance." Sarah sank into a chair, her world spinning. All this time, she tried the same thing with me, Ethan realized. Using the people we love to control us. Just then, Emily's monitor started beeping erratically. Everyone turned to see Victoria standing in the doorway, her face ashen. "Is it true?" Ethan demanded. "Did you try to kill Sarah's mother?" "I never meant..." Victoria's composure cracked. "She was going to ruin everything. The family name, our reputation. Where is she?" Sarah stood, her voice shaking. "Where's my mother?" Before Victoria could answer, hospital security appeared behind her. With them stood Detective Morgan from the Lakewood Springs Police. "Mrs. Blackwood," the detective said, "we need you to come with us. We have some questions about a 3-year-old accident." As Victoria was led away, Ethan reached for Sarah's hand. "We'll find her. I promise." Using the phone number from Martha's files, they called Pine Grove Care Center. Within hours, they had confirmation. Janet Mitchell was alive, still in a coma, but receiving excellent care. "I'm having her transferred here," Ethan announced. "The best neurologist, the newest treatments, whatever it takes." "But your grandmother froze the account," Sarah protested. Ethan smiled. "Actually, she tried to, but Dad was smarter than that. The account was set up with dual authentication. It needs both my signature and Martha's." Victoria never knew. Emily, who had been quietly watching everything unfold, suddenly spoke up. "Does this mean we're all going to be okay?" Sarah looked at her sister, then at Ethan, then at Martha, who had become like family to them all. "Yeah, sweetie, I think it does." As the afternoon sun painted the hospital room golden, they began making plans. For Emily's surgery, for Janet's transfer, for the future they could finally see clearly. Because sometimes the darkest moments lead us to the brightest beginnings. But first, there was one more battle to face, one more truth to confront. And the next day would test them all in ways they never expected. 1 year later, the Blackwood mansion was transformed. Gone were the cold marble halls and empty echoes. Instead, laughter and hope filled every corner. The East Wing had become the Blackwood Mitchell Recovery Center, where families dealing with long-term illness could stay while their loved ones received treatment. Emily, now healthy after her successful surgery, led art therapy sessions for young patients. Her own artwork hung in the center's halls, bringing color and life to what had once been stark white walls, but today was special. After months of innovative treatments and rehabilitation, Janet Mitchell was finally coming home. Sarah stood in the mansion's entrance, holding her mother's hand as she took her first steps into their new life. "It's beautiful," Janet whispered, her voice still soft from years of silence. Her eyes filled with tears as she saw Emily running toward them. "Mom!" Emily crashed into their group hug, careful not to squeeze too hard. "Wait until you see the art room and the garden we planted. And let her breathe, sweetie," Sarah laughed, her own eyes wet with happy tears. Ethan watched from the doorway, his heart full. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes. Victoria's trial had made headlines, but in the end, justice had been served. She was now serving time for her crimes while the Blackwood fortune was being used the way Richard had always intended, to help others. Has this story touched your heart? Share it with someone special and let us know in the comments which moment moved you the most. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire. Martha appeared with refreshments, every bit the proud grandmother figure she'd become to them all. The guests will be arriving soon, she reminded them. Today wasn't just a homecoming. It was also the official opening of the recovery center. Families from all over the country would be arriving, finding hope and healing within these walls. Hard to believe this was once just a party house, Ethan said, walking over to put his arm around Sarah. Hard to believe I was once just your cleaning lady, she teased back. You were never just anything, he said softly, kissing her forehead. The first families began arriving, their faces showing the same mix of worry and hope that Sarah had worn a year ago. Emily immediately went to work, showing children her art supplies, making them feel at home. Janet watched it all with pride. Richard would be so proud, she said to Ethan. He always believed in you. In Richard's old study, now a comfortable meeting room for families, his portrait still hung. But it no longer seemed to judge. Instead, it seemed to smile down at the scene below. As evening fell, Sarah found Ethan standing in the garden, lost in thought. Penny for your thoughts? She asked. Just thinking about that first day you came here. How lost I was. How one letter changed everything. One letter and a lot of love, she corrected. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Speaking of letters, he pulled an envelope from his pocket. There's one more thing Dad left for us. Martha found it last week. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside was a simple note. For the ring, when you're ready. Ethan dropped to one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. I think we're ready. Sarah's yes was lost in the sound of applause. Their entire extended family had gathered in the garden to witness the moment. Emily hugged them both. Finally! I've been holding that secret for weeks. As stars began appearing in the twilight sky, the mansion glowed with warmth and life. Where there had once been emptiness, now there was family. Where there had been pain, now there was healing. And in the end, that was Richard Blackwood's greatest legacy. Not the fortune he'd built, but the hearts he'd helped bring together. Because sometimes the richest people aren't those with the most money, but those with the most love to give. In the years to come, the Blackwood Mitchell Recovery Center would help countless families find hope and healing. But more importantly, it stood as a testament to the power of second chances, the strength of true love, and the truth that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Emily's latest mural in the center's entrance said it best. Welcome home. Because that's what the mansion had become. Not just for their family, but for every heart that needed healing.